Hey everybody, welcome to the AIGA Colorado Boulder Lunch and Learn. We've got a few people still streaming in, so we'll just kind of hem and haw for a few minutes. This is Jeremy Tinianow. He is our guest today.
Hi, everyone. I'm excited to show you guys some of the Figma stuff that I get to do every day.
So is this software you use every day?
Oh, yeah.
Your main software?
Yeah, I started using it when it got released to the public, I think like 5 years ago. And I started using it kind of here and there. And like over the years, it became just more and more of like a regular thing. So now it's my main tool.
Oh, cool. So I guess I'll do an official welcome now and get started. Welcome to the AIGA Boulder Lunch and Learn, and I'm Amy Hayes, I'm your host. And my guest today, as I said, is Jeremy Tinianow. He is an independent designer here in Colorado. He's also AIGA Colorado's web chair. So welcome, Jeremy, and thank you for being willing to do this. This is part 2 of a 2-part series on design systems, and this one is called Hands-On with Figma. And I hope all of you got an email yesterday with a link to join Figma, download the desktop app, and then a project that Jeremy has set up to start working in. We'll just do a little bit of housekeeping before Jeremy starts. At the bottom of your browser window, you'll see a button for a Q&A channel. So feel free to post questions for Jeremy throughout the talk, and he's going to be pausing throughout and checking out the questions and answering it throughout. There's also a chat button. Feel free to talk amongst yourselves there. We probably will not be monitoring that as closely, so if you do have a question, make sure to post that in the Q&A. So I think that's all I have to say. Jeremy, welcome, and it's all yours.
Thanks, Amy. Like I said, I'm excited to be here, and I'm excited to share with you guys some of just the way that I have used Figma in the past to create design systems. What I have lined up for today is kind of a loose structure of like, we can get started with just like how I might approach some of these problems, but I do want to encourage you, if there's something specific you want to go over, definitely post it in the Q&A. I'm going to try to keep an eye on that and react to, whatever you guys are interested in. So this kind of rough outline I've got is like, assuming we're going to start with like an unrealistically small amount of detail about what this design system is for. So all we know is we are going to be making a digital product. We need to have a design system in order to, make it consistent and make so our team can collaborate more easily. But I don't really have a prompt in terms of like who's the client or what's the use case or like what even line of business they're in. I kind of wanted to keep it open, so whatever we'll go over should be applicable to you, no matter what kind of work you do or what kind of company you work for, whether you're agency side or in-house or whatever. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. And I also posted a link to the actual Figma file in the chat. So if you are not in there already, you can definitely get in there. I see a few of you are already here on the cover page. So definitely feel free to get in there. Cool little tip, you can actually go up here in the top right, and if you click on someone's avatar, you actually will follow and see whatever they're seeing. So this is mine, the black and white photo. So you can also, if you'd rather follow me here and not on the screen share, you can just click my avatar and it'll take you around. Another really quick thing to be aware of, because we are going to jump around to different pages in this, you get to your pages on the top left, and there's this little drop down arrow thing on the right side of that left panel. So if you're not seeing pages, just try clicking that and it should show you those pages, and then you can kind of jump around and follow. So to kind of set us on the right path for this, I did a really quick exercise of putting together some really simple and basic kind of design principles for us to work on. And these are like not the most specific things ever. These might be kind of applicable to a lot of different situations, but I think it's important to include these as like a backboard as I go through and make decisions to see like, are we hitting the mark, missing the mark, et cetera. So the ones I put on here were familiarity. So we're going to try to use kind of familiar patterns and analogies to meet our audience halfway. Novelty, so we want to do something that's maybe a little bit less familiar, so like kind of a counterbalance to that first one. Accessibility, personally I think accessibility is really an important thing to a lot of products, so I'm going to emphasize it here as one of our principles for this system. And bendability, so kind of keeping things flexible and making sure that we don't make any rules that are so hard and fast that you would have to like break them to use any of our components. So with that said, see, looks like we have one question that just came in. How should we be documenting margins and paddings for components in the design system to be shared to developers? Asking this as designers use pixels in Figma while the developers might need to use ems, rems, or percents for responsive web screens. That's a great question. I'm gonna try to hold on to that when we get into the component part of this. It is definitely a surprisingly big topic, I think, depending on how your team is doing things. I want to start with styles, and then we can get into some of the more like how to document components kind of stuff. So for now, I'm going to jump into the styles page. And I think kind of the chicken and egg here is always colors and type. It's kind of hard to do one without the other, because so much obviously of digital products is typography. But we also want to be kind of looking at that with some colors on it, I think is usually helpful. So I usually will start with defining a color palette, since it's pretty broadly applicable. And maybe one of the easiest solutions to start with, just drawing a rectangle and setting its fill to white, figuring like, we're going to have a grayscale no matter what. We're probably going to use white or off-white or something as a background color. And then we're going to need some shades of gray, dark gray for like text and borders and that kind of stuff. So I usually like start with a white and then go with something. I usually like to do like a little bit of saturation in color palettes. So I might go and do like move the hue to somewhere kind of like orange or yellowish, and then just saturate it like a little tiny bit. So we'll get a little bit of that happening. And then kind of as we step through this, one thing I'd recommend when you're making these, I really like working in HSL color space, because it's like super easy to create ramps of like value-based colors. So like here, my lightness value is 97. So it's really easy for me to just bump that down to 90. And now we can see it's kind of fading into the background. But as we do more steps, that'll get a little bit easier. So like, I don't have to worry about these being like uneven steps to look like perceptually good. This color space kind of like solves that for you. So we can do like a bunch of steps here. And I'm just going to bring these down until we get all the way to something close to black, but maybe keeping it a little bit off black to just make it a little bit easier on the eyes. So let's see, bump it down. I do a couple more of these. I'm gonna show you guys some plugins pretty soon. There is probably a plugin that can automate even this process. I'm not really aware of a specific one, but it's worth knowing, like when you run into things that feel like maybe they're taking longer than they should be, someone else has probably run into that pain point before and might have already solved it. So, okay, so now's the fun part where we can start to actually define some styles. So you're looking at this and it's got a fill of pure white on it. So this little button with the 4 dots is how you create styles and how you apply them. So it gives you this little color styles panel. I'm going to click plus, create a style. And we can call this something really simple. Like we can just say like gray. Let's see, do we want to do, I guess we do 0 because it's like 0% gray. And you'll notice the reason I'm naming these this way with like gray / whatever is because this will actually organize them really well for anyone who's using the system in the future. And you'll kind of see that like how they're coming in here. Then if I'm like looking at this, see how it's in color styles, now it's grouped. It's doing that because I did the / in the name. So let's see, do gray 30, gray 40. And I wouldn't actually like super recommend doing like all of your colors with naming this way, but I'm gonna show how you can you can give like multiple names to the same color in Figma, which is super nice because you can name things like based on usage instead of only doing it really literally and then having to like write another layer of guidelines to explain to your team how to use stuff. It can make things like a lot more obvious and easier to work with. This is 80, 90, okay. So now we've got the very beginnings of a color palette, these local color styles you can see over here. Okay, so I want to pause really quick for Vinicius's question. Considering accessibility, do you inform accessibility color compliance in the system? Absolutely. That's actually a really timely question because that's kind of the next thing that we're probably going to get into here. So now that we've got a grayscale, one of the things that I might do is say I've got my grayscale and now I want to make sure that this is going to be accessible for colors. So I'll make an artboard or a frame as they call it in Figma. Say maybe we want to do gray 0 for the background. And then I'll just do the quick brown fox, little sample of text. Okay. And without making any, I'm just going to use the default type for this right now. So I know I want to have usually a pretty close to black text color and a pretty close to white background, but maybe I want to go off white because I might want to, at some point in the interface, I figure I might want to have the kind of like default elevation of it to be not the brightest color so that I can put things that are pure white on it and give them a little bit of dimension and a little bit of affordance to maybe indicate that something is clickable. So I'm going to start with our second darkest gray and our second lightest gray as the background. And then I'm going to try maybe going like 2 steps lighter, for example, on the text. So now if I zoom in, you can see like we get a little bit of additional contrast from having the different colors. Maybe it's not quite enough, so I'll go a little bit darker on this one. So at this point, to your question about accessibility, I would use a plugin called Stark. So if I select this and then right click, do plugins, I already have it installed. And it's got 2 pieces. It's got a colorblind simulation, which I actually just used for the first time yesterday, and it's really cool. It shows you if you're not colorblind, how those color combinations would look for someone who is colorblind, and it even gives you options for like different types of color blindness. But for now, I'm just going to do the check contrast. So as you can see, it's giving us a nice readout that's telling us, you know, not only what's the contrast ratio of the color on its background, but it's also showing us, it's taking into account the font size. So it can tell us like at these different font sizes, we're good or we're not good. So then I'm going to try that. I figured that one would work because it's our darker color, but then does our lighter color work? I can just hit the shortcuts command or control option or alt P runs the same plugin again, or you can just right click and run it again. So here I can see we're getting AA for our normal text size, which is great. We're not getting AAA, but I'm not super worried about that because AAA is usually a standard that, you know, for the vast majority of products isn't necessarily a realistic goal or even worth kind of aiming for. So I'm just going to say we're good with AA for this. So now that I'm getting an idea that like this is the color I want to use as like my base background color, and these are kind of two text colors, I'm actually going to break the reference to the shared style here with this, with the link. So I'm going to detach the style. So now if that style ever got updated, it wouldn't update this because I've broken the reference between them. So I'm going to create then a new style. And now I'm going to start getting into semantic naming. So I'll call this background/base. The reason I always do this is because when another designer picks up this system and starts using it, and they're wondering, probably the first thing they're going to do is create a frame and start putting stuff in it. So they know right out of the gate what color should the background be. It's the background base color. It's just named that way in order to keep things kind of obvious. So then I'm going to do the same thing with these. I'm going to just select both of them. Actually, I have to do it one at a time. Attach the reference, go and create a new style. I'm going to call it text. Or actually, I'm going to call it content, because I think I'm going to want to use the same colors for icons as well. So I don't want to name it just text. I think that gets to that principle of kind of bendability or flexibility. If I call it text, then I'm going to create a situation where someone's going to be designing with this and need to have an icon color. And I don't want to have another separate icon color because I'm trying to avoid having like too many different categories that becomes like hard to wrap your head around. So if I name it this way, it's a little bit easier to work with. So I'll say content/base. I'm going to do the same thing here. But now I need to come up with a name that's going to work for maybe different contexts. So again, we want to be flexible. So we might want to think about things at this point, like, are we going to accommodate like a dark mode? So I don't want to necessarily call this content/light, because it's going to actually have, it's always going to be the one that's like a little bit less contrast with the background. So if we're in dark mode, the lighter one is actually what's the darker one now. So they kind of have to be named in a way that feels kind of interchangeable. So I'm going to call it content subdued. So now I've got a little bit of a different, a little bit more in the color palette. So one thing I would do at this point is drag these up. The reason you drag these up is because it'll make it so when someone goes to like create something new and they're going to apply them, they'll see it, that order gets carried over. So if you want to encourage your team to like use the right colors for things by use case of like background or text or whatever, it's helpful to bump those all the way up to the top. And then keep your like more kind of primitive colors further down. That's usually how I'll handle it. Okay. So I'm going to pause for a question. Jose asks, I've imported a very robust design system from Sketch, broken up in different libraries. How could you convert/create the color and typography styles in Figma very quickly without going through a manual process? The answer to that is absolutely with a plugin. I don't know which one you would use. So that's actually a really good segue though, because I know I had mentioned plugins and promised to get into those a little bit. So at this point, Jose, if I was in your shoes, I would say, this is going to take way too long as a manual process. It seems like something that should be automated. So I'm going to go and see if there's a plugin for it. So if I click the little Figma icon, and this is a little different if you're in web, but on the desktop app, it's that icon up here at the top. I'm in something called the community beta, which makes it just easier to browse plugins and files. And there's a whole bunch of other really cool stuff. It's definitely worth checking out. If I wasn't in the community beta, I think there's a plugins item on this menu. Another thing you can do is search for it. So let's say like I want something called like sketch import. So like that's actually just files and projects. Okay, I think this is a little bit different for me because I'm in community. So I'm actually just gonna search it here. So what we're trying to do is like convert styles or something, right? So I might search for that. I don't find any files or plugins or anything. So one thing I'll say is it's a little bit of a criticism of the current setup for like finding plugins and Figma is it can be a little bit hard to like discoverability is a little bit difficult. But a lot of these plugins come from like teams or entities that are like bigger than just a Figma plugin. So I would actually recommend just going and doing a Google search. And sometimes you'll find a plugin. And maybe if you just include the word plugin in the search, it'll be more likely to give you a result that's that specifically. So cool. Okay, so now that we've got some really basic colors, I think we can start getting into type. So I'm gonna delete some of this stuff, zoom out. So the first thing I would do, I'm gonna start with just a font that I like. This is what I used on the principles, it's called DM Sans. This one's just a really kind of funky looking font from, I don't know, grotesque, I guess, kind of a little bit geometric. It's kind of reminds me of like Warsite, the font that they use for Slack, and I think like MetaLab uses it. I really like this font, but this one's free. And just a side note, in case you're unaware, you actually get all of the Google fonts by default in Figma. You don't have to go and download them. And it's actually better not to, because if you do download the font and you install it, then you use it in a file. Sometimes you'll end up using the local one and the remote one gets updated, or someone you're collaborating with doesn't have it. And then there can be like some weird errors. So it's usually better if you want to use a Google font to just do it straight from the Figma UI. Okay, so probably the first thing I'm going to do with coming up with type styles is set some idea of a body size font. So if I'm zoomed at 100%, and this obviously might look different on your monitor. I'm on a big external monitor. I think 16 is a little small, so maybe I want to do like 18. And maybe I even want to do, I'm going to just go over here and copy some text. I don't like doing this as a single line because I'm trying to establish body copy. So that looks like a little bit less than ideal, I think. Maybe I'll make a copy so I can see them. Where was my starting point? So it looks a little bit tight, so I might do something different to the line height. So I can do line height here as a pixel value or a percent. My personal preference is always to do percent because it's kind of more modular and it's easier to, like at a systems level, it's easier to say like, we use line heights of 125% for titles and 150% for body copy, rather than to say like the line height for this font size is this, right? So I might have to say like, we have a body font size and a body line height, and then like a large body font size and a large body line height. I don't have to make as many discrete decisions. I can kind of just say like, the line height's 1.5 or 1.25. If it's one of those values, it's correct in the designs and it's also correct in the built product. So this looks a little bit better now, like 18, yeah, 18 at 1.5 looks pretty good. So I'd say I'm happy with this as a body font size, but I know I'm gonna want other font sizes too. So I'm gonna make this, I'm gonna take this back to the quick brown fox. Good old quick brown fox. So now I'm going to show you guys, this is a plugin actually that I made called Textiles. I mentioned it in the last one. And this is kind of a preview actually of some changes I'm making to it. So this one, you can go and install it in Figma today. But after I released it, I found for a lot of reasons, it wasn't kind of able to scale in the way that I was hoping. So I actually redid a lot of it. So I have is a development plugin, and the first thing I'm gonna do is generate a type scale. So this isn't built into Figma, just to be clear. This is an example though of kind of like building a tool as part of your design system. So like all these values here are actually getting saved to the Figma file. So if someone I'm collaborating with is like, we need like more type sizes and we need them to adhere to the same type scale that we did before, they don't actually need any documentation of that type scale. They can just go and run this plugin and it's going to handle that for them. So by default, my ratio is 1.2 and I've got one step, so I can go one step smaller than what I had from the selection, and I can go one step larger. And if I had multiple, if I wanted to try previewing this in a different way, all I have to do is like click, and if you hold Alt or Option and drag, it copies it, similar to like what you have in Photoshop or Illustrator or Sketch. But now I've got a different selection, so I can actually just like change the font size of that, and I see it gets, actually looks like it, maybe it doesn't get updated. Okay, so I have to like unselect it and reselect it. But like as I'm changing between these, I can actually see kind of like the preview update if I want to try different things as I'm seeing like how the scale starts to shape up. But I'm going to use this one, and I'm not really sure what I'm going to need, so I'm just going to use the defaults and say I want, yeah, one step before and 4 steps after. So I'll generate those sizes, and now I've got them all here. And another thing that is kind of nice that this plugin did is it actually named those layers for me. So this is great because I'm going to use those layer names are going to determine the style names that we use later. And again, you see they've got, or actually these ones don't have the slash, but I am going to use the slash when we make more styles. So I've got my type scale established now. But I know I'm going to need more than one way to create hierarchy because I've, designed enough things to know you usually need more than just different font sizes. So I'm going to copy all of these. And I'm going to see, I probably need like a bold weight. So now that I've got all of those, I have 2 separate groups here. So I'm going to do, with all of these selected, see, I think you can either do, I'm actually not sure how you do this one without the shortcut, but the shortcut's either Command R or Control R, and it pulls up this renaming dialog, which is super handy. So what I can do to bulk rename these, but keep their kind of base names intact, is I can say, I want to do the current name, and then I want to do like slash bold. So I do rename, and then those are all good. So now if I want to keep these like nicely organized in that sort of folder structure way, I would do the same thing here and say current name slash base. Okay, so now I've got the same type scale and I've got 2 weights, but I don't have any textiles yet. So the next thing I would do is select all of these and go. And if you wanted to, you could do these one by one in the same way that you do color styles. It's the similar type, the little 4 dots thing, and you can go and name each one and all that. But that sounds like a whole bunch of work that I don't want to do. So I'm going to just go and make it development plugins, textiles. So if I do create textiles, I think this gives me a small little preview. Maybe it doesn't. Let's see. It's running. It's doing its thing. Okay, so it's just giving me a little preview of how it's going to call them. So this is my like last step before deciding that I want to kind of release these. So now I've got 12 textiles, and they're all applied to the layers now. So now you see like this is title slash base. And that was interesting. It gave me, oh yeah, it gives a comment on it. But that's not really super important. So got a couple of type scales now, 2 different styles. I'm feeling pretty good about my ability to create hierarchy with these. Okay, so someone asked, are the iOS fonts in there too, SF Pro? I mean, I'm not entirely sure about that. The reason I'm not sure about that is because I have SF Pro installed on my machine that I downloaded from Apple. So I honestly can't tell. I think I'd have to go and like disable the fonts and see if they're included. Yeah, I don't know if they're included or not. Okay, and then we have another question from James. As a front-end engineer, I'm always doing math to convert pics to rem conversions. Can Figma make this automatic? That's a great question. Let's see. So if I go over here on the right to code, let's see, we'll get font size is 37 pixels. So, okay, that makes sense though. I think unfortunately, James, I think the answer is no, because Figma would have to know what your base font size unit is that you're using on the front end in order to make that conversion accurately. So like we could assume it's 16 pixels, but like unless you have some input way to make that happen, I don't think it would do it automatically. So yeah, unfortunately, I don't think there's a super automatic way to do that. What I would say is like, you could certainly, like as a designer, I could spec this a certain way and say like, if I did want to document these a little bit more nicely, I would say like body is 16 pixel / 1 rem, right? And then can go and just do that and say this one is, or actually, since I did 18 as the base size, and this is small body, so it's 15, oops, 15 over 16, right? 15 pix / this calculator I use, by the way, is called Numi, and it's really awesome, especially for doing this type of stuff. So if I say like, I know what all my sizes are, I can go and it gives me these little like click to copy interface for each one. It's really a handy thing. So that's my rems. Okay. So now I'm realizing as I'm starting to label these though, what I'm getting into is I actually have a need for something repeatable that I would use that's only for documentation. So it's not really part of the system, but I want to have it and be able to reuse it. And I might want to change my mind about it. So I'm going to actually I guess this will be the first component we'll make, and it'll actually be a documentation component. So I have a page called _ documentation. It just says underscore because that's what I have typically done in the past as like a signal to people I'm collaborating with that this thing with an underscore isn't really part of the system, but it might be like part of the file or part of the structure. So I'll go in here, and I already have one that I made for the principles. So I'm going to make another just frame here, paste that thing we just did. And I'm going to rename the layer. You can do this in any order you want, but I'm going to rename the layer as like type, call it like underscore text style label. And then I can right click it. There's a lot of different ways to make a component. I can go and right click it and do create component. And also with it selected, this little diamond thing up at the top does it. Or I can do Command Option K or Control Alt K, turns it into component. And now you can see it has a different appearance in the layer panel. That's how you know it's a component. So I could copy that, or can go back to the page. Oh, nice work, Karen. That's looking nice. I'm going to flip over to assets here. Sorry, I didn't mean to call you out. This is a safe space. Keep doing what you're doing. So under local components, I've got documentation. Okay, desktop one. So I'm going to just pull this in here. And now I've got that label here. I can do again, let's see, body was 18 pixels, or that's not the right number, 1.125 rems. Do that. And maybe I realize at this point that I actually want these, maybe I want the text to be right aligned. So this is an important thing to understand about components and instances in Figma. So a component, and by the way, if like a lot of people are finding that I'm going over stuff that's like too basic, please let me know in the Q&A and we can like kind of speed through some of this stuff. But if not, I'm totally happy to keep going with it. So I just did an update to an instance. So like other times that I use this component now, if I copy this one again, it's still going to be, the text is still going to be left aligned. right? So this is, I think it's called large body. No, it's called subtitle. Subtitle, okay. So like this one is also an instance of the parent component or the master component. But because I only changed an instance, it's not going to update there. But if I copy this one, it will. It'll keep that override intact. So if I wanted to apply this right alignment to everything, I can go back to the master component and change it. Or a way that I'm actually finding myself do a lot more often right now, because it's kind of it feels like a cleaner workflow, is to just go and select this one and then right click, do master component and push overrides to master. And unfortunately, it looks like we lost our actual text content. But since I started doing that early, I'm not like super worried about it. So I actually have to update this one, which was what, 15 and that 0.9375 rem. Cool. So then, let's see, I guess it was subheading. So subheadings, 22 pixels. Nope. Go back to my calculator and get 22 over 16. 1.375 rems is ideal for that. So I could keep doing this. This is another one that's kind of interesting because it's, you could make a plugin to automate even this process, but it would probably be, I think it would be hard to make like a universally reusable plugin for this, but you can also make like the one I showed you guys, the development plugin. That's totally a viable way to like scratch your own itch if you're finding there's just something that you particularly need. You don't have to open source everything and you don't have to publish everything. You can make a plugin that's just for your own workflow and doesn't have to be like camera ready for everyone. I actually have a few that are like that I'm probably the only person who will ever use them, but for me, they speed up my workflow and make the work a little bit easier. All right. So now that we've got some color styles and some type styles, and I'll just acknowledge that this is like nowhere near the level of cleanliness that I would want or documentation that I would want for an actual design system, but we have the kind of core substance of it. So I think we can move on to getting into some components. So I'm going to make a frame, and I think it's kind of a easy decision to make to say like the component we know we're going to need on web probably the most is a button, right? We don't need to know like what's the product, what problem does it solve, who's the audience, so on and so forth. Like there needs to be some way for a user to take action, and buttons are such a common pattern. We could make the argument that it's, you know, familiar, and I think we should try to even do something that maybe makes it a little bit novel. So I'm going to try to come up with some button design that's going to be a little bit different. So to make a button, the first thing I would do is probably just write the word click me, of course. I'm going to set it to use our content base color. This is probably going to change. We don't want it to be the small size. We'll start with the big size. So got some text, and then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to put this in a frame. So I can do that. And a frame, like frames and groups are really important concepts in Figma. I've found myself using frames a lot more lately. It's like a group, and it's like what you would think of in like Sketch or other tools. A frame is a little bit different. So what's cool about frames is I can like put a constraint on something and say like, I actually want this to be pinned to the right. So now if I change the width, it's pinned to the right. There's a whole bunch of other stuff that's really cool you can do with frames. But for now, the thing I want to show you guys, because it's a new feature and it's super, super helpful for this use case and for a lot of other ones, is called auto layout. So over here on the right, I can add an auto layout, and it doesn't matter. This horizontal vertical thing isn't really important to us right now. But these two boxes give us padding values. So if I say like 1818, now what I've got is this button frame that's always going to have the right amount of padding around it. even if I go in and change the text to something like a much longer label, that thing, you can see when I select it, it's not super obvious right now because of the lack of color, but it's always going to have consistent space around the content that's inside of it, which is great because that honestly behaves a lot more like it would on the web. So again, it's good for cross-disciplinary collaboration. It's also really good for just workflow being a little bit faster. It's really useful for stuff like lists as well. I think we'll probably get into some other use cases for it, but one thing I'm realizing now that we're doing this button is that I don't really have a good color for buttons. I kind of forgot to do a primary color. So we can go back to styles. I'm going to just copy this because it's got the base color. But I did kind of a warm grayscale, so I think it might be nice to do like a really cool primary color. I think we'll get a little bit of extra contrast that way. We'll get kind of the hot cool thing and the value contrast going too. So I kind of like that. And I think it's like kind of a interesting thing about design systems is like we don't always have to make the right design decision first. We can kind of just make something and create the structure. And maybe this isn't what we ultimately want it to end up being, but we have a structure in place now that we can like change and iterate on and see those changes will just like cascade through a whole project. So that's our primary color. And then I suppose since we have text colors already, I'm actually going to do this kind of in context to the button situation. So I'm going to make its fill be primary, and now we can't read the text, obviously. So I could go and say the gray, the white is probably good. I'm going to use Stark again to just test this for its contrast and make sure that we're good there. So yeah, we have an excellent contrast ratio. So I don't really want to use this like gray 0 for this. I want to call this, because it is a text color, I'm going to call it text on dark. There's a lot of different ways that we could do that, but, or content, I forgot I was naming them that way. So we'll do content on dark. Okay. And that's not like the right or wrong way to do it. That's just personal preference. Okay, so here's our button. Kind of looks like a button. It's pretty flat. Maybe we actually want to do a little bit less, like a small amount of padding there. It feels a little bit more balanced. Okay, so what else could we do to this? Well, first we should make it a component. So I'm going to make the component, and I'm going to call it button for now. And we probably want to have multiple types of button actually. So one way we could do at this point is we could say like, this is our button. And then this might seem like a dumb thing to do, but I'm just going to duplicate it and then make another component. So this is an instance, but I can make another component out of it, which means that it'll just keep its reference to the parent. That was kind of weird. How did these end up? Okay, this is the one I want. I'm going to create a component, call it button/primary. And then I'm going to make one here. Oops, that's not what I wanted. Make another one here, call it button/secondary. And again, there's no definitely at all wrong or right way to name a button component. Button strategies are all over the place. There's always pros and cons. But let's see, I'm going to do this one. I'm going to give it the background fill actually. Actually, I want to give it gray 0, but I want to rename this now because I'm realizing I'm going to need more than one background color. So I'm going to call this background/light. Okay, and then the text, in this case, I'm going to make that the primary color. I'm going to add an outline. And let's make it kind of thick, actually. Okay, something weird happened where I didn't quite get, let's see, Didn't quite get that stroke where I wanted it to be. If I have to add it here. Okay. So now we've got a little bit of a different appearance for our primary and secondary buttons. So I think it might be kind of interesting at this point. I saw this button style recently that I really liked that was kind of like not at all skeuomorphic, but like a little bit dimensional, but in like a really geometric way. So I'm gonna do this, try to see if I can recreate what I'm picturing. Figure show is better than tell. So send that to the back, give it the same background color and the same stroke that we used on the other button. And then maybe move it a little bit closer. So kind of what I'm picturing here is like, this gives it a little bit of dimension, and then we can get into, when we get into like hover states and active states, we can start to have some fun with like how this is positioned. So now I'm gonna take this rectangle, which I might call like background or something, and I'm gonna drop it into there. But this is a little bit of problem because I have auto layout on the whole thing. And that's not really what I want. So I'm actually gonna take auto layout off of this. Actually, I'm gonna undo that so that I can keep it where it was. So this is actually kind of a new territory for me even, like when you're using auto layout and combining it with like non-auto layout can be a little bit tricky. So this definitely isn't like the right way to do it per se, but we're gonna see if it works. And that needs to be obviously behind that. So then I'm gonna take this background and pin it to the bottom left, actually bottom, you can do left and right. So you can also pin things where you like hold shift and pin it to both dimensions. It's kind of a useful trick to know. So let's see what would happen now if I copy the button and give it a longer. So obviously that didn't work super well. So I need to resize it till we get to, I'm kind of doing this manually to just get it to, okay. So now I've got a button component that I can kind of pull this strategy off in, and it does require some manual resizing. I think right now auto layout doesn't really let you kind of bump things like outside of the bounding box this way. So there might be a better way to do this component from like a design workflow standpoint. This definitely isn't like the end all be all. Delete that. Okay, so Sarav, sorry if I pronounced that wrong, asked, can you please send the link or names of the plugins that you've used or use to help ease out the workflow? Absolutely. I'm actually going to grab those right now. So Stark is probably, oops, that was a mistake. Sorry, the stop share button was right on top of the search bar that I needed to type into at that moment. Okay, Stark. Am I sharing? I might be sharing the wrong screen now. Sorry, guys. Technical difficulties. Okay, I think we're good now. This is Stark. So I can actually just copy the link to this. Stark is one of them. And then the other one I used is Textiles. And I'll try to make a note to even like write some of this stuff up. We can send it to everyone afterwards if you guys are interested. Okay, so those are those two. So it's Stark and Textiles are like the two main ones. Okay, so back to our buttons. Let's see, how are we doing on time? We have 10 minutes left. So I think the probably, okay, let's look at, I think the most important thing, since we only have 10 minutes, I want to make sure we have time to go over this because it's, again, tying back to like, we're talking about making a design system with Figma, so it wouldn't really be that useful if we didn't publish it. So you can go into assets, and this little book up here is called Team Library. I put this file in a team account. I think you maybe get like 1 or 2 team libraries on a free account. If you're in a team, you get unlimited ones. So hopefully everyone who's seeing this would have access to this feature, but if not, just know it's there. It's definitely available for teams. So I'm gonna go and say, publish this. I can do a message here. I typically do these just so my team knows when I publish something what specific components change, because when you end up with, you know, potentially like 100+ components, it's kind of cruel almost to expect your team to go and like dig through and find exactly which one changed. But I'm gonna just call this first publish. So you can do that, and it's gonna do some stuff here behind the scenes. Okay, so we successfully published our library. That's great. At this point, see, that's private to this file, so that's good. Local components, yeah, cool. We've got these there. Okay, I'm actually gonna be a little bit fastidious and clean this up. So know that the name of your frames actually affects how people see components in your component library. So ideally I would name this button instead of just the default like iMac one or whatever. Rename, so I'm gonna say renamed button frame, something like that. Publish that again. Okay, so now I can go and create a new file. So this is entirely new file. None of y'all have access to it. But then if I go here and the same button I clicked to publish it, I can go and do this and say in Figma Denver, I've got all these different libraries. I'm gonna turn on the one that we just created. So I've got, it's weird that I have a component there. So we've got our button component. And this is obviously a super simplified, like you wouldn't, this design system isn't really useful yet, but just to kind of demo the feature. So I can already go and see, here's my color styles that I created, and I can pull a component in. I actually wanted to pull in a primary button. And I don't know, I'll center it or something. Okay, so now I've got a totally separate file that's pulling in this library. If I go here, there are a few things I could do. So like, let's say, for example, I want to change the primary color. I decided we did some A/B testing, and it turns out that this shade of indigo isn't hitting the mark for our audience. So I want to go and say, click the primary base color, and then these little edit things will let me go in here and edit it. So I want to maybe get a little bit weird and say we're going to make this actually like kind of orange. This is going to be really challenging with showing like errors and stuff, but I'll try it out. So I changed that here, and then locally, it'll just update it immediately. So everything in this file, when I change things that inherit each other, the updates happen immediately. But what you notice on the bottom right is we didn't get that didn't automatically publish it to the shared library, which is good, because if I was working on my thing over here and all of a sudden like all the colors change, I'm gonna be freaked out. So we have like kind of 2 points of friction introduced here to help avoid that. So first I have to say I'm gonna publish it. And then again, I'm gonna say like I changed the primary color. So it's publishing, okay. But then still here, it won't be immediately updated. It's gonna tell me that there are updates available. So I can either dismiss that. If I wanna keep this file kind of frozen in time, I could say I don't want those updates because maybe this is for a feature that already shipped and we don't wanna see it get updated. But if this is something that I'm actively working on, I might say, okay, I wanna review these. And I don't have to actually commit them and get surprised when something crazy happens. I can just say like, what actually did change. So I see it's like, really the only thing I'm gonna see is the button got updated, the style got updated, so that's cool. And this is actually, it's interesting because you'll notice it's only telling me that the button is updated. It's not telling me that the primary color is updated. The reason I think for that is that the only thing in this file that uses that color is the button. So it won't tell me like every single update, but it will tell me the ones that are relevant to me working on this. Which is just a really nice thing to be aware of, because you can kind of like publish your design system, not like willy-nilly, but you don't have to be like super careful. The tool actually handles a lot of that for you. So I'm going to say update all, and now we've got our new updated button. Okay, so we only have about 4 or 5 minutes left. It looks like I don't see any outstanding questions. Now is a good time to ask if you do have anything. Trying to think if there's anything else that in particular I wanted to share with you all. I think actually a good one to be aware of is version history. I think this feature is kind of, I've usually been the one to like kind of introduce this into teams that I'm working with, which makes me think maybe it's like a lesser known feature. But it's really great. It's built into like any Figma file. And when you're on a paid account, you get unlimited version history. Otherwise you get it for 30 days. But you can go to File and then see Show Version History. So this is just happening in the background all the time. And if you click on one of these, it just takes you kind of back in time to where the file was at that point. You can also go and restore it to there. So it's kind of cool to not have to, worry about like every decision being final. You can always get back and change stuff. You can also basically like hit undo for your teammates, which is really cool. If someone like spills coffee on their keyboard and something crazy happens, that person doesn't have to fix it. You can fix it for them. But I'm going to go back to edit current version. And then let's say at this point, I might want to, like you can see in the version history, it didn't have nice names, but you can also save a name and say like Rev1. What did we do today? We added initial color styles, added initial type styles, and we created a button component. So now I know like this was a pretty safe place for everything to get to. And then if I want to go now, I'll often do that. Like I'll name a version right before making some big crazy sweeping change, so that I know I can get back to that particular version like super easily. Okay, so we have 2 minutes left. So if no one has any more questions, oh, actually there are some. Let's say I have a local textile and don't make components for the same. What difference does it create? Can you list pros and cons? Local textile and don't make components for the same. I think if I understand correctly what you're asking, I think it's, you're talking about creating a component of that's like a one-to-one with the textile. Personally, I never do that. I know that I've worked on systems in the past where like I know the development team is going to create components for that stuff. I think the cons is it's just like one more thing to update, and it's one more layer of kind of stuff to worry about. Textiles are really simple, and that makes them more reusable than a component, even if the component is just kind of like a one-to-one with the textile. So I can't think of any pros to making like a one-to-one of that. Someone else might disagree though. You're going to get probably a different answer from different people. And then Derek asked, do you do nested components like using a button in a bigger section? Absolutely. Nesting components is a really powerful way to kind of compose interfaces. So that plus like with the auto layout feature now is making it even easier to achieve like really kind of rapidly iterated results. So definitely would recommend nesting components. I think it can be a little bit tricky sometimes. You can end up kind of nesting things like way too deep and making the component difficult to work with. But if you're talking about like just one component in another, I think it's a great way to work. And then I think this will be our last one, and I'm going to grab a drink of water really quick. One challenge in the past, this is from James, one challenge in the past is design changing stuff after dev handoff. Can versions prevent this? For example, can you create a release version 1 and pass that off to others? That's a great question. I don't think that there's a way to do that like in a single file. I believe it is a pretty requested feature though. And I think I've heard some rumblings, like some rumors that Figma team might be putting that on the roadmap soon. So right now in one file, I don't think you can do that. But what I've done in the past as a workaround is if you can duplicate a file. So you can just go up to the top right and say, drop down, duplicate. I'll often do that. Like I'll just duplicate a feature file and then put a hard date on it and then say like, just no one better edit this. And it's also because it's a new file now, you can set different sharing permissions on it and prevent people from editing it. So that would be my recommendation there. Okay, so I'm gonna hop off screen share. That's all I got. Thanks everyone for joining us. That was really fun, and I hope it was informative for you all. And yeah.
Thanks, Jeremy. Yeah, I learned a lot, and I'm excited to dig in and play around in Figma, and I really appreciate it. And you know, the context of the design system in general, I think you really brought to life how that can work in Figma. And if anyone missed part 1, we will be posting next week a video on AIGA Colorado's YouTube channel, so you can see the video from last time and you can see this video there. Hopefully that'll be live next week. And I just want to say that this is a part of our Lunch and Learn series. We're going to be taking a break this summer, and hopefully we'll be able to reconvene at the CMCI studio in the fall. If not, we'll have some programming online. So if you have anything that you'd like to teach or that you'd like to learn, please reach out to me, amy.hayes@aigacolorado.org. Jeremy, do you want to say anything else about how to get in touch with you?
I'm just at Tinianow everywhere. It's 3 words, Tinianow. So you can find me online, and if you ever have questions, I'm definitely down to chat, talk shop, whatever.
Cool. Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend.